Mornings can be hectic. We get it. You're pressed for time, but you still want to stay informed. Let the connector from Boise State Public Radio do the work for you. Every weekday morning, this quick and convenient podcast delivers the top Idaho news stories you need to know, all in the time it takes to brew your coffee or start your commute. No scrolling, no searching, just hit play and get connected. Listen to the Connector Idaho Daily News wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Jim and Gaudette. It's Idaho Matters. The little town of Robinette was flourishing, nestled in eastern Oregon by the Snake River, with a school, a hotel, even a train depot. And then one day in 1957, the town was gone, wiped off the map and buried, drowned, under the reservoir created when Brownlee Dam was built. Robinette is known as a drowned town, and it's not alone. There are a lot more of these submerged towns around the West and even around the country. Enter Bob Reinhardt. He's an associate professor of the Department of History and the School of Environment at Boise State, and he's the project director of the Atlas of Drowned Towns. We actually had Bob on Idaho Matters several years ago to talk about his Drowned Towns project. He's here for an update. Welcome back, Bob. How are you?
Oh, thanks. I'm glad to be here. I'm doing well.
You were just starting your multimedia public history project, the Atlas of Drowned Towns, when you were on Idaho Matters. I think it was 5 years ago. A lot has happened since then. Tell us about drowned towns. I sort of described them, but what are they?
Yeah, well, these are places, and Drowned Towns is sort of it's a catchy title, but it's really meant to encapsulate or capture all these different kinds of homes and places that were deliberately moved or eliminated to make way for the reservoirs for large dams. You talked about Robinette. That was one that was moved to make way for Brownlee, but there are hundreds of these places in the United States and thousands once you start reaching into the rest of the world. And I'm really interested in finding out where these places were and making some connections between them so that we can maybe draw some lessons from them.
And you mentioned not just towns. There are places that were sacred to folks like the Navajo and the Hopi and others. I mean, these are just all kinds of places that were submerged because of one reason or another. What were some of the reasons?
Yeah, precisely. So the case you were talking about with the Navajo probably has to do with Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell and Rainbow Bridge, which is a sacred site for the Navajo. And my colleague Erica Busemic has written a great book about that. So we have indigenous homelands, we have small towns like Robinette, individual farmsteads and ranches, all sorts of different. And, as you start to look into the rest of the world, you can see huge populations. In China, for instance, the Three Gorges Dam complex displaced 1.5 million people. So the scale of displacement is pretty wild.
So tell me about the Atlas of Drowned Towns. It's a website. It's a great website. I highly recommend everyone check it out. What can we see on it?
Yeah, so if you go to drownedtowns.com, you will see some of the fruits of the labor that we've undertaken over the last 5 years. When I was last on the show, I had just received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities that allowed me to kind of explore with community members what a project might look like where we could explore the histories of inundated and displaced communities. And that's what we're trying to do now on the website. So on the website, it has everything from an archive page where you can find all the different kinds of artifacts, photographs, oral histories, three-dimensional objects that we've scanned. Those are in our archive. We have a directory of drowned towns, which right now numbers almost 200 displaced communities. And then the thing that I think is coolest is the map, which has all of those artifacts geolocated that is placed on a map so you can see where a photograph was taken or where one of these inundated communities was. And you can explore the map, find places that you are familiar with. And then we have another part of it called Share Your Stories, where you can tell me and tell the team about places that we don't yet have on the map that we want to get on there.
Well, I'm looking at the map right now. I'm just kind of clicking around. You've got the towns, the areas that disappeared. You've got the waterways like the dams and the other things that submerged them. Pictures of things. I'm looking at, there's a picture of Anderson Ranch Dam. There's a picture of North Bonneville, a town. There are just dozens of these all around this map. This is incredible. Where are you getting all this info?
Well, a little bit of it is a dogged historian's research, going into archives, large and small, and trying to find evidence of these places. Often they were so small that they didn't have their own archive or even their own newspaper. And so looking for references in other newspaper articles or in government reports. We also work with, right now, the project, we're cooperating with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the Willamette Valley, which is where a lot of the research is taking place. And we're getting from them digitized artifacts, old maps, tracked registers, things like that, so we can learn more about the people that were displaced. But then we also have these community outreach and archiving events, which we call history jamborees, where we go to a community that was displaced or is close to one of those. And for a couple of days, we set up some flatbed scanners and oral history recorders and our 3D scanner. And we encourage people to come in and share their stories about places that they loved, that they had to leave, or more likely these days now that they're the descendants of people who had to leave. So we had one of those in Detroit, which is on the west side of the Cascades. We had one of those in 2023. And in 22 days, we're having our next History Jamboree in Sweet Home, Oregon, which will cover Green, Peter, and Foster dams. And we're really excited about that.
We're speaking with Bob Reinhardt. He's an associate professor at Boise State. He's the project director of the Atlas of Drowned Towns. He recently published an article called Exploring Submerged Resilience, the Atlas of Drowned Towns in the American Historical Review. So you mentioned the history jamborees. I love this idea. You're gathering up things like family lore, pictures, oral histories. How does this all bring people together?
Yeah, well, that is really, for me, the best part about these jamborees. It's wonderful that people share their artifacts with us, and we're so honored and proud to be able to put those on the website into the database and share those with the wider public. But the events themselves are just priceless, where you have people, sometimes they are folks that they themselves had to leave, or more likely, as I mentioned, their descendants now coming together. We have coffee and cookies out, and people just sit around and talk and share their memories and connect over these places, because they are very much real. Although they are in many cases displaced or disappeared, they remain very real and resilient. That was kind of the point of that article, in the ways that people remember them, tell their stories about them, and hopefully we're contributing to that resilience a little bit in maintaining the permanency of these places, even though they're underwater.
Right. I'm curious, did anybody object when their town was submerged? I mean, were people upset?
Well, it depends on the time and the place. Early on, during the really big dam building boom years in the American West, that is the 1940s, late 1940s and into the 1950s, you don't see too much resistance. And that has a lot to do with the spirit of the time and the early Cold War, I think. But as you move into the 1960s and into the 1970s, certainly you see much more vocal resistance. One of my favorite oral histories, one of my favorite artifacts that we have on the website is an oral history by a guy named Alfred Jenks. And he lived up in the area near Dworshak Dam, and he was pushed out because of the construction of Dworshak Dam. And the local historical society did an interview with him just a few years after that, after he was forced to leave, and he voiced very strongly his disapproval. He said, "I hated it. I think it said something like, it done away with everything that I ever loved." So you see some of that. Other times it's much softer. A letter to the dam building agency saying, "Do you really have to build it here? Couldn't you build it someplace else? And if you can't, can you make sure that I'm treated right?" And so the spectrum of response to displacement is one of the things that I find so fascinating, sometimes heartbreaking, often very encouraging in terms of people's determination to be recognized for the value of their lives and their homes to be recognized.
Well, we've got about 2 minutes left. Tell me how your research of the past is relevant today.
Well, I think one thing that's pretty immediately clear is about the continued displacement that's going to happen because of climate change. We have coastal communities, especially marginalized indigenous communities, that are going to be displaced, and finding ways, hopefully, of preventing that. But if not, being able to understand the loss that's going to happen, the deep loss, not just the loss of property, but the deep loss of home, and ways perhaps of trying to incorporate that into our cost-benefit analyses and trying to find ways of preserving those places, perhaps in material form, but if not, then in people's stories, memories, the artifacts that they save.
Well, I think it's a fascinating thing, and I encourage everyone to go check it out. Bob, thanks so much for coming back on and giving us an update. We're going to have you back on, I think, in another year or two and find out where you're at then.
I look forward to it. Please do, everybody. Go to the website, go click on Share Your Stories, and send in your information about places that were lost to dams. We'd love to put it up on the atlas.
Fabulous. We've been speaking with Bob Reinhardt. He's an associate professor at Boise State. He's the project director of the Atlas of Drowned Towns. He recently published an article called Exploring Submerged Resilience, the Atlas of Drowned Towns in the American Historical Review. You can find out more about his research in a great article in the magazine of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It was written by former Idaho Statesman reporter Anna Webb. You may know that name. We're going to put some links to all of this, including to the Drowned Towns website, on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org.
I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.